You've talked about this looseness, but I feel that there is quite a lot of controlled aspect to it. But when Gauguin comes into the picture, the movie becomes more structured. The dialogue seems more structured. Can you tell us about Gauguin and those scenes?
Well, I think the movie, I don't know what, whenever you want to have questions or have a conversation, I'm ready if you feel like it. At the beginning, we both felt like it would be kind of rote to just show that he's rejected in some way, where the guy in the cafeteria is throwing him. I mean, it happens to be true that he had his paintings in this cafeteria, and Gauguin was the guy who actually saw the paintings there. So, but that's irrelevant whether it happened or it didn't happen. The thing is that I thought it was important to show something of the madness of Vincent or the wildness of his life before entering town, before showing what was happening in the Tambourin or what the world was like in a urban setting before he got to Arles. And so there, if you're talking about structure, there is a bit of something that is quite normal. Once it says at Eternity's Gate and you see what's happening in Paris. But once he gets into that room, I'm always very nervous when I'm watching the movie, but once, if everybody stays until he gets into the room and he starts painting those shoes, I've got everybody. When Gauguin shows up, we get a chance to talk about friendship, camaraderie, also, and talk about painting. Things, but I think that well, there's more dialogue. Maybe you're talking about dialogue and structure. But the physical opportunities that present themselves have to do with the locations and the landscape and the weather. And so, for example, when we went into the chapel that's next to the Ali Scump, I'd been there before, but never really thought about it. When we went inside those columns, and I mean, it was a what's it called? When people go to visit, tourists go to visit monuments. Okay, so it was a monument in the 19th century. They're looking around at these columns, and we thought, God, we got to shoot in here. It looks like Andrei Rublev. So rewrote the scene to where when they have this argument, Van Gogh runs out. Instead of Gauguin leaving, Van Gogh runs out of the chapel through the sarcophagi. Benoit is running with his camera at the same time through that. I mean, it's kind of amazing. I mean, first take also. In fact, most of the movie is shot in the first take. Emmanuelle Seigner, when she's speaking, it's first take. Willem, when he's talking to Dr. Ray, Mads Mikkelsen, Matthew. We get other takes, but usually it happens right away.
In the first take.
Yeah.
Going back
so
to
to answer your question.
Sorry.
So anyway, so then he runs out, and at a certain moment, then the camera is, I mean, Oscar's talking to the camera when he's talking to Vincent, when he says, you're surrounded by stupid, wicked, ignorant people. And so it's pretty radical what Oscar has to do, and also what Willem is doing, because Oscar's not there. Willem's doing that to the camera, so those events are separate, but obviously they're two people relating to each other. And I think that even though they're communicating, the structure is dictated by what's emotional in there and what's and movement. And so, and then obviously we started running their conversations over, rewinding. If you have ever had a problem with anybody or you wonder what went wrong in your life, you think, okay, well, so what did we say? Yeah, she said that, and I said that, and then she said that, and I wish I didn't say that, and or why did I, you know, and then you kind of, so I think that that was an impulse to which was not scripted originally, and there are things like that that would happen just as you start working, as you're painting. I mean, there's some people that will dial in their artwork, or say Jeff Koons is somebody that will make a work, he'll design how it's going to be perfect and let somebody else build it. And it's a valid way of making art, but a painter thinks, okay, well, I'm going to work on this. Maybe if I touch it a couple more times, I could fix it and make it a little better. But it's a different animal, and it's a different process. And I guess in the way of making this movie, it's not something that's preordained, preconceived, then illustrated. That's just not the way we do it.
About Gauguin and Van Gogh, we're used to, in history and other movies, they have a tempestuous relationship. Instead, you present as two artists that are equal, and they're having a relationship, a friendship. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about? I mean, and they do have different approaches. One observes and it paints models, and the other one is painting from memory. Can you tell us about that approach?
Well, I think friendship is very, very important, and I think that Vincent wanted a friend. I think he wanted a sense of community. In fact, he looked for a family in a lot of different relationships, but it wasn't his family. It just didn't work out with his family and his father and the way. But he did keep in contact with his sister. Anyway, so essentially, Theo paid for Gauguin to go down to Arles. And I think that Gauguin had great respect for Vincent, and Vincent did for him too. So there was this very, very important relationship, but when I think they were incompatible, but they did have a real dialogue. I think if you look at Gauguin's paintings, the paintings he painted changed radically after he hung around with Vincent, and at the same time. So that letter that Vincent receives when he's in Saint-Remy, where Gauguin says, "I'd like to trade a work with you," that's a real letter. Later, the thing that came on in the yellow, he wrote that 4 years after Vincent was dead about his yellow room. So usually Gauguin is portrayed as sort of a jerk in relationship to Vincent, but it really wasn't like that. And I think he really cared about him, and I think they both respected each other. The conversation that they have where Vincent says, every time I look at nature, I see something I've never seen before. Gauguin is talking about, we're talking about a time of revolution at that moment in all sorts of spheres of thought. And he's saying, without your eyes, there's no landscape. So he's talking about chemistry, physics. I mean, he's talking about there's a field, and you receive the field doesn't exist until you receive it. And then that's sort of segueing into abstraction, where, but at the same time, when Van Gogh says, paintings come from my palette, not from reality, they're not so far away from each other. There's a quote that Francis Bacon used in 1954 when he was painting Van Gogh on the Way to Work paintings, and he wrote, Van Gogh said, "How to achieve anomalies, inaccuracies, and refashionings of reality to where what comes out are lies, but lies that are more true than literal fact." So he wasn't trying to paint a photograph. He was painting paintings, and there's a painted world, and there's a painted language, and people communicate, transgress death in that form, and that's what he was doing. And so whenever somebody can arrive at that place where they can experience that, or it be brought into their present, that's when somebody starts to see.